Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and this is my reaction to the 90th Academy Awards. It sort of wasn't as painful as I thought it would be in certain ways, but then was painful in other ways that I didn't think that they would do, I guess. The Shape of Water, of course, won Best Picture, which felt a little surprising, even though it was kind of in the group of films that I thought and most people thought could win Best Picture. It's kind of weird every year where Best Picture feels like less of a lock, because Best Picture almost always feels like a lock, or it feels like it's between two movies, and this year it felt like it could be between 5 movies, and it ended up being Shape of Water, which feels a little odd because most of the time recently we've been getting Best Director and a Best Picture who usually aren't for the same movie. In fact, we haven't had a Best Picture and a Best Director for the same movie since Birdman, and that seems to be happening a lot more recently. It used to like almost never happen, and now it happens fairly regularly. So having a film that does win both Best Director and Best Picture feels sort of out of the ordinary and strange in a certain regard now almost, which is kind of interesting. And although I think it was expected for Shape of Water to kind of clean up to a certain regard since it had the most nominations and everyone knew it was going to win Best Director, that wasn't too unexpected. But I think in terms of the ceremony itself, Jimmy Kimmel didn't do what I thought he would do, which is overly rely on the fact that last year he had the big Oscar moment where, you know, they named the wrong Best Picture and everything like that. And oftentimes with award shows, you have a big spontaneous moment, whether it be like Kanye West taking the mic from Taylor Swift, or there was the Golden Globes, I think it was whatever year Good Will Hunting was up for it. You know, Christine Lottie, I think, was in the bathroom when they were trying to give out her award, and I think that was a really spontaneous one. And then the next one, because everyone's expecting it the following year, it usually sucks because it's not unexpected at all. Like, you got lightning in a bottle and you're not really going to be able to do that again. And I think with something like the Kanye Taylor Swift thing, you had one where like they both performed and they like kept referencing it and things and became obnoxious. This Oscars didn't do that too much. It's brought up at the beginning of the show, which kind of felt like they sort of had to bring it up, so you're like, okay, fine, whatever. Jimmy Kimmel brought up a thing about the accountants and how the producers asked if you wanted to do some comedy with the accountants, and he turned it down. They ended up finding a way to do comedy anyway, and that was a little funny. And then he didn't really, I don't think, bring it up again until the end of the show when they had Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway come back to do Best Picture, which I thought that was sort of fine. That was probably better handled than I think anyone thought it would be. I was really worried. I mean, you know, you had cute moments like Del Toro when he won Best Picture checking the envelope himself. They seemed to find the best way around it. It wasn't like the highlight of the night or anything like that, and it wasn't going to be, but you had to acknowledge the elephant in the room at the same time. But then Kimmel seems to overly rely on this jet ski joke where if you gave the shortest acceptance speech, you would win a jet ski. But he seems to have a sort of an ugliness behind his jokes where, like, oftentimes he came out quite a bit. It felt like he was, like, his presence was always around it, which was obnoxious because I didn't like him and I don't like him normally. The jet ski joke and the thing where they went into a theater of people watching Wrinkle in Time and then interrupted it, and no one in the theater went, oh man, Wrinkle in Time. It felt like maybe the bad review thing was true because nobody objected. They were like, oh yeah, no, I don't need to see the rest of Wrinkle in Time. But it felt like sort of a disregard to like your average Joe in a lot of Jimmy Kimmel's jokes, which was sort of a little uglier. I didn't particularly like that. Like the idea of like, oh, these stupid people, they like their jet skis and we're going to interrupt their movie and they'll see celebrities and they'll be so loud because they're so easily controllable. And it just like doesn't really play very well. It plays as him like pandering and looking down upon the viewing audience or the ticket buying audience in such a way that it's sort of ridiculous. But I think he sort of thought people would think it's funny or such a crazy experience, like, can you believe that happened? But it just comes off as like very much like, let's watch the peasants be excited by the movie stars. And Kimmel never was able to really make any of that work. The jet ski joke was dumb and people kept referring to it and giving it more and more power, I guess. But it's also like, you know, the thing about the Oscar acceptance speeches are things people tune into. It's not the acceptance speeches' fault you run long. It's because of like you have clips for things that don't make any sense. I mean, this was the 90th Academy Awards. I've seen other like big milestone Academy Awards, and sometimes they'll do, here are all the Best Picture winners, and it'll take forever, but it's like sort of something where you're like, oh cool, you can see the evolution sort of movies. Not a great evolution of movies, but you can sort of see it through that, and it's kind of an interesting thing. I've seen it before and I love those things. But instead they had ones like, hey, people like movies and what about people in war and stuff? It sort of would make more sense to do something on horror with Shape of Water and Get Out, or you could do a history of genre and specifically the genres of the movies that are nominated for Best Picture and have it like tie in a lot of ways. I know the Grammys do that if like a certain artist from a certain genre gets nominated and they don't normally, they try to do more of a set piece on that, and that would have actually been interesting instead of going like, hey, war, man, yeah. It is weird because this year normally the Oscars start at 8:30, and the main reason they do that is so everyone else can have their dumb red carpet coverage, but then the Oscars can have a half hour where it's only their red carpet coverage for like this 1.5 hour. And I guess they realized like that was dumb. It just made the show run long, but the show still ran long, so I guess that doesn't really matter. It was a noticeable improvement, although it was like the first year I had a kid and I was like, oh cool, they moved it to 8, and I was like, oh shit, am I gonna make it so I can actually sit down and watch this thing at 8 o'clock? The rest of the awards, like seeing Roger Deakins actually win for Best Cinematography was amazing. That was one of the coolest things, and he felt genuinely touched. I think like Roger Deakins is an amazing DP, and he did an amazing, beautiful job on Blade Runner, whether you liked it or not. So I think that was one of the bigger wins for me personally. I loved Coco's win for Best Song. I love Remember Me. It's a song I sing to my daughter each night, and I really genuinely think that is a beautiful, like, all-timer kind of movie song. Probably the best performance of the night, because Remember Me isn't just played the same way throughout the movie. They play it in different versions, and to be honest, they could have done the third version as well, but I feel like that needs to be saved for the movie to a certain regard. Of course, Coco won Best Animated Feature, which we all knew, and Lee Ulrich joins his Pixar friends, with Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, and Brad Bird having won 2 Best Animated Features. They all were for Pixar, and they're the only people who won more than one Best Animated Feature. I noticed he didn't specifically name John Lasseter, which for obvious reasons, I guess. I knew win-wise it was going to be more spread out. There wasn't going to be a huge winner. And I guess the biggest winner of the night was Shape of Water, not only because it won Best Picture, Best Director, but it won 4 Oscars, which is more than anyone else won that night, which doesn't feel like a big kind of sweep or anything like that. Dunkirk ended up winning 3, but it ended up winning 3 like editing and 2 sound awards. It didn't feel as like substantial in a certain way, and especially with so many of the major categories being sort of locked, so it felt more of a coronation. Particularly, like, it felt like everyone ran out of steam when Gary Oldman won. Like, the audience was like, yeah, we've known he was gonna win for like a really long time. You won finally, it's fine, just get off the stage. Like, it just didn't feel like people were into what he was saying at all. But I'm glad Gary Oldman has an Oscar. I don't know if it was, I didn't see Darkest Hour, although it is one of the films that won more than one. It won for makeup and for Best Actor. 3 Billboards, of course, took the 2 acting awards that everyone thought it would. The visual effects thing I was sort of annoyed by, because I think Planet of the Apes deserved to have won one. I think they should have probably given it for Dawn, but I forget what they let win instead of it. This was their last chance, and so they just went with Blade Runner, which sure had great special effects, but it's like, you really should let Weta and the people who made the special effects for War of the Planet of the Apes to kind of like have a bone. You know, they did an amazing job. Like, it's just like awe-inspiring and beautiful, but I think it's just not as showy. And that's something like the Oscars have always wrestled with, where if like you really love film, you're not necessarily as into the showy performances and the showy technical things. You know, you're interested in the people who kind of have the subtle nuances, and you can kind of pick apart and tell like why they're such geniuses. And Oscars often picks people who are very obvious about those choices. I think the visual effects in Blade Runner 2049 are a little more obvious to that, and especially like the Sean Young thing, I think shocked the fuck out of everybody, and that probably helped them win. Kobe Bryant winning was a bit like, oh, okay, I didn't see Dear Basketball, so I can't really comment on that. I would have liked Agnes Varda to win. I did sort of, on my Oscar prediction, sort of just pick Icarus just by like, I don't know, that's a word I know. But the Russian doping thing I think is such a big deal, and everything with Russia, it definitely helped that. It was a little sad seeing Allison Janney win, and then they'd be like, oh, now we'll play the trailer for the new Roseanne, and you're like, oh, why are you playing it then? Because you thought Laurie Metcalf might win. It would be this great moment, and it didn't turn out that way. Jordan Peele is the first African American to win for Best Original Screenplay. I thought it was very well deserved. I very much loved Get Out, and I was like happy for him to win Best Original Screenplay. I was a little surprised. I thought it would win Best Picture or another one, but Best Original Screenplay is fine by me. At least it won something, particularly like a Blumhouse film winning Best Original Screenplay. What crazy world do we live in? Best Adapted with James Ivory finally winning. I think that one sort of worked because it kind of got the older vote who like loved the Merchant Ivory stuff, and it got the newer vote who, you know, wants to vote for a film like Call Me By Your Name. It kind of like got cross-generational kind of appeal that way, so it definitely like worked for it. Also, it was, I think, the only film in that list nominated for Best Picture, so it's sort of obvious on that one. But I will say it kind of like took the air out of the room. Like, just so many major categories sort of told to you who was going to win months and months ahead of time. It didn't feel surprising for the most part. Everyone knew Frances McDormand was going to win, and Gary Oldman and Sam Rockwell. A little Allison Janney might have gone either way. Same with animated feature. It's like everyone knew Coco was going to win. It wasn't like much of a competition. I sort of would have liked if one of the smaller independent films had one, but having all these other people win who you expected to win just like made the show feel awful boring at times, and there wasn't much they could really do because there's so many award shows between the first one, which is like the Golden Globes or something, till the Oscars, and these actors keep going back to like SAG, to like whatever critics group and things like that. So by the time they get there, you're like fully aware of who's probably gonna win, and it didn't feel like this show had the spontaneity to kind of like maybe make you think this person might not win even if they are, or something like that. They never really got past that, and I think that's one of the things with Jimmy Kimmel as a comedian and as a host. He's not necessarily good at keeping things moving. He's like sort of good at just being an MC and being on when he needs to. He kind of just does it as a TV presenter, but like he's kind of one of those things, like I know that oftentimes now when you have an award show on a network, they're going to want their late night host to host it just because of synergy and things like that. And there's nothing about what Jimmy Kimmel did tonight that I think would make someone go, oh, I have to see Jimmy Kimmel Monday night. I have to see it because he was so good on the Oscars, or I have to start DVRing it, or I have to watch it on demand or something like that. This just felt like boring kind of regular TV kind of crap that makes you go, oh, I don't think I'm really missing anything. Like, this jet ski joke isn't honestly even that funny. Jimmy Kimmel didn't really arise any confidence. I like didn't see that and go, oh, this is why ABC likes him. Like, oh, these are the shows that I'm missing. They really should not have him back. Like, I don't really get why he came back. He was even on the first time. I don't get why they brought him back. But like, we've had this Jimmy Kimmel era. Let's just like get rid of it, be done with it, get someone more interesting. It was actually great seeing Maya Rudolph and Tiffany Haddish together presenting. That was amazing seeing them together. I know that Paul Thomas Anderson has often talked about how he wants to work with Tiffany Haddish and maybe doing something with his wife Maya Rudolph and Tiffany Haddish, and after seeing them present, I definitely agree with that. I don't think this Oscars was without some interesting moments and things like that, and fun moments and great moments, but it didn't feel as exciting. I think that was something I never thought it would, but having too many major categories kind of being coronations just sort of takes the wind out of everyone's sails. It's interesting to have like all the technical categories be the tougher ones, and then the major categories sort of being like, yeah, these are what you would expect them to be, and just much down the line. But then having Best Picture sort of open, it was a different sort of Oscar year. It definitely felt a little differently, but it felt like something you sort of gave less of a shit about, because I think you sort of, and it's unfortunate, maybe we need those major categories because you need the star to like get you in and grab you, and I don't know if other than cinematography those awards really did that. You know, it was cool seeing Alexander Desplat, and it's also fun saying his name, like win an Oscar, and it was fun. There's certain people who I was like, oh cool, Deakins, Desplat, Remember Me, you know, certain ones like that I really love, or even Del Toro winning for Best Picture and everything. Like, those things I think were nice little surprises, but they weren't enough to make this like any sort of a memorable one. You know, you had a huge memorable year last year. There was no way they were going to follow it up, and in some ways I think they tried in different ways, and I think it was a little more successful. I think going up against such a major, like, oh my god, they named the wrong thing kind of year, I think they did a decent enough attempt, but it kind of showed its age and showed what needs to change about it, which is like speeding up, cutting out all these stupid montages unless you have somewhat of a point with them that like actually reflects the films that are nominated. You have enough time to do that. I don't see what the big deal is with that, and getting rid of Jimmy Kimmel and finding someone funny, because there are a lot of times like Kumail presenting and Tiffany Haddish and Maya Rudolph where they stole the show from Jimmy Kimmel, and it was like fairly easy to do that. You know, it's not like because I want a more diverse host. I honestly 100% just want someone who's funnier than Jimmy Kimmel, and I think he is like just like really painful to watch come on all the time. Like, he had a lot of really dumb bits, and I wish they'd go, you know, Jon Stewart's not doing anything. Ellen DeGeneres is always a good Oscar host, but I don't think Jimmy Kimmel really has it in him. He was there to just kind of do his normal bullshit, and we were supposed to go along with the ride. And maybe that's the thing with Oscars also. We're supposed to go along with their normal bullshit and pretend they're not racist, and pretend that Time's Up thing kind of matters to them. And it was kind of like an all nice, all right for show, and like they sort of kind of did better with it than you thought they've done in recent years, but at the same time, you know, shit doesn't smell as stinky for once. And I think that was sort of the Oscars in 2018. You kind of just knew what you would expect from them. It was a nicer time than most. It sucked that Toby Hooper wasn't in the In Memoriam thing, and there are other great character actors like Powers Booth who wasn't. They still managed to fuck up. They still managed to be all Oscar-y as usual, despite having cool movies nominated. But it is a little weird having that Oscar movie be, you know, the Guillermo del Toro movie where a lady fucks a fish and stuff. Kind of shows how weird things have gotten. I was sort of okay with them, but I'm sort of like, I really wish you'd find a way to make these faster and quicker and make these categories a lot more interesting. And I think without that, it just feels like another bland Oscar year that we went through, and the people we thought that would be coronated were, and we'll just move on from the movie year with that and sort of forget about all this stuff. And not only did this feel like it didn't make an impact on the audience at home, who is mostly like, what are some of these fucking movies? It didn't feel like it made sort of any impact on the year of film whatsoever. And I think that shows more to the Academy's incompetence at running and kind of showing their lack of relevancy in terms of a movie-going audience. And this one definitely showed that more than anyone. Even I think if The Shape of Water is, you know, one of the higher grossing Best Pictures, it's not like, you know, one of the higher grossing Best Pictures that everyone and their mom has seen. It's one where they have to, you know, some of the people in the audience have seen it, but most haven't. It's great to show smaller movies, but I think it also shows rewarding movies that maybe not necessarily aren't as going to be as memorable. Because like, is Shape of Water my favorite Del Toro? No. Is Three Billboards going to hold up 5 years from now? Probably not. And I think the Oscars just kind of keeps reminding me of my problems with it, and its kind of irrelevancy in the newer age of Oscar is that they really don't get what the movies of the year are, and they kind of throw that in their face that this is what they think the movies of the year are, even if everyone's already made up their mind anyway. And the Oscars are proving a point that no one's really interested in listening to, and I think this award show kind of highlighted that more than most years do. So if you have seen the 90th Academy Awards and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.